Once I was on my way to my friend's country house. It was an ordinary working Friday, and by evening, anticipating the taste of grilled meat and beer, I was speeding along the highway from the city toward the country house. It was nearby, only 30 kilometers from the city, and I knew the road by heart, so much so that I could find my way there with my eyes closed. Nothing complicated, almost all the way straight, and only at the end of the journey do I need to turn towards the village of Graskoy, and from there, it's a stone's throw away. That day, it was raining with a thunderstorm, and visibility on the road was poor, so I was driving slower than usual. Getting into an accident was not part of my plans for today. Halfway there, I got stuck in traffic. Where could it have come from on the highway? After 2 hours of crawling along at a snail's pace, I saw the cause of the traffic jam. Road construction. As always, whenever I travel, there are always adventures, road repairs, accidents. Well, I'll have to take a detour. And how lucky. Right before the barriers set up by the workers, there was a turn onto a dirt road with a sign indicating a detour through a village. The sign was so old that the village's name was unreadable. Well, maybe it's not so bad. I'll be delayed a bit more while bypassing the construction, and then I'll rush to my friends with all sails set. As I turned off the road, I noticed that I was the only one taking the detour. All other cars immediately turned around and headed back toward the city. Strange. Maybe they know a shorter way? Oh well, I had already turned onto the dirt road and didn't feel like turning back. Of course, there were no streetlights on this road, and it looked old, with signs that cars rarely drove on it. But it was hard to see because the rain had turned the road into a muddy mess. I hoped I wouldn't get stuck in this quagmire of earth and clay. Driving was difficult, especially in my not-so-new sedan. In the distance, I saw the roofs of houses. It was already past midnight, and the rain was turning into a fine hail. Great, just what I needed. Continuing the journey in such weather was almost impossible, so I decided to call my friends to tell them I would arrive in the morning and try to spend the night in this village, hoping someone would take me in. I grabbed my phone. Of course, no signal. It's the 21st century, but as soon as you leave the city and turn a few kilometers off the main road, you're in the Middle Ages. Well, I hoped my friends, drunk as they were, wouldn't start searching for me in the middle of the night but would just fall asleep, and I'd catch up with them in the morning. I approached the first houses. Apparently, this village consisted of just one road with houses standing on either side. Speaking of the houses, they didn't look particularly inhabited. I didn't see what was with the other houses, but the first two shocked me a bit. To say they were old is an understatement. They were dilapidated, rotting, overgrown with impenetrable bushes. None of the windows had light. This didn't surprise me, given the late hour people were probably asleep. Although, were there any people here at all? Suddenly, lightning flashed, and I glimpsed a silhouette on the road. It was tall, even lanky, with arms longer than those of a normal person, and it was dressed in rags. In that brief moment of illumination after the lightning, it ran toward the nearest house. This all happened in an instant. I thought perhaps, due to poor visibility and fatigue, I imagined it as a monster. Surely it was a person escaping the hail, running home. That's what I convinced myself. Excellent. That meant there were people in this godforsaken place, and I could negotiate for shelter. I didn't want to get out of the car. The rain was so heavy that even 30 seconds outside would drench you to the bone. But there was no choice. Sleeping in the car was not an option. I drove as close as possible to the house where the person had run. I grabbed my bag and some money just in case the hosts asked for payment for the night, and gathering my courage, dashed out of the car. I ran toward the front door under the porch. Drenched, I instantly felt cold and damp. Yeah, the weather in early October is something else. How does the song go? There's no bad weather. Oh, there is. There certainly is. The porch was leaking, but it was better than standing in the pouring rain. I knocked on the door. Anyone home? Is anyone here? Silence. I knocked again. Nothing happened. I tried the door, it wouldn't budge. What to do? Running to another house would mean getting completely soaked and possibly sick. No, I didn't need that. Maybe I should go around the house and see if there's another door. Worth checking out. With this plan in mind, I moved along the side of the house, glancing briefly through the window. For a second, it seemed like I saw some movement. Somehow, through the dense bushes, I reached the back of the house. There was indeed a door here, leading to the garden, although I wasn't sure those crosses in the yard were a garden. Wait, crosses? What are crosses? What are crosses doing here? The backyard looked more like an old cemetery than a garden. Something's not right here. I didn't have time to think about what I saw as the door behind me creaked open. Without a second thought, I darted inside. The door closed. Must be a draft. The house smelled musty, damp, and slightly burnt. Well, at least the rain wasn't a problem now. I took out my phone and turned on the flashlight, noticing that the battery was down to 15%. I started scanning the room with the light. A table, a chair, a mug, plates. I was in the kitchen. I remembered that I had entered the house without an invitation and should probably let the hosts know I was here. Hello? Could you shelter a guest for the night? I can offer some money for your help. In response, silence. Only the sound of rain on the roof broke it. Okay, if no one's here, maybe I can quietly spend the night, and if the hosts return, I'll explain everything to them nicely. So, I had a plan. I needed to find a bed. Sleeping on the floor wasn't an option. There was no bed in the kitchen, so I needed to venture further into the house. The floor creaked loudly under my steps. The atmosphere was eerie. Night, an old house with its own cemetery in the backyard, creaking floors. All the horror movies I'd ever seen flashed through my mind. A chill ran down my spine. I walked through the kitchen and found myself in a small room. On the wall hung an enormous clock. You know, the kind that chimes the number of hours every hour. They looked very old, and the pendulum seemed somewhat soot-stained. In this room, I also saw a table covered with rags, stained with either dirt or something else. The room was in terrible condition. The wallpaper was peeling off the walls, the ceiling was covered in leaks, and overall, the room looked ghastly, with smeared dry mud on the floor. Near the table stood a spring bed. Its headboard was very rusty, suggesting that no one lived in this house. No one would sleep on such an old bed. No one but me. Sleep hit me unexpectedly. No wonder, after a whole work week of sleep deprivation and more than 5 hours on the road. Yeah, those 30 kilometers to the country house turned out much longer. Not being too picky, realizing the house was probably abandoned and the hosts wouldn't come, I sat on the bed, not fearing it would collapse and I'd fall through the rotten floorboards into the basement. I wondered if there was a cellar here. Well, the bed didn't collapse, a good sign. Using my bag as a pillow, I closed my eyes and unknowingly fell asleep. The fear somehow disappeared completely. I woke up to a foreign sound. It was as if someone was walking in the kitchen, and the floor creaked annoyingly under the steps. Opening my eyes and trying to understand what I was doing there, I sat on the bed and shouted, "Is anyone there?" The footsteps stopped. Clearly someone was there. I got up from the bed and went to the kitchen. No one. I turned on the flashlight on my phone. The floor was covered in fresh mud. What was this? What was wandering around here so dirty at night? And where did it go? My thoughts became muddled with fear. Turning toward the exit from the kitchen, I saw a tall shadow flicker into the room. I rushed there. More mud. It led to a small hatch on the floor. How did I not see it when I entered the room? Should I go down there or leave it be? I've never dealt with the supernatural before. Sitting on the bed, I began to think about what to do next. I probably couldn't sleep anymore, and running back to the car didn't appeal to me. I had just dried off, and the rain outside hadn't stopped. I had to go looking for adventures on my own. In my bag, I found my old Swiss knife, at least some kind of weapon. Though if it was something supernatural, it probably wouldn't help me much. Gathering my courage, I approached the hatch. Should I open it? No. Why? But what if there's something interesting down there? Yeah, like a ghoul or something. That's interesting. Well, I had to do something. Ending the argument with myself, I began to open the hatch. Its handle was covered in that same mud and smelled so bad that I almost saw my lunch again. It smelled like death. This was getting out of hand. Well, since I was already dirty, I had to finish what I started. The hatch was open. I shone my phone down. Wooden steps leading into the darkness and nothing else visible. Great. Descending into the unknown. I noticed that my phone had only 5% battery left. So I'd quickly go down, look around, send any ghosts back to the afterlife, and go to sleep. That was the plan. As I leaned down to start descending, something suddenly pushed me from behind, and I tumbled down. Silence, pain in my head. I was lying on something hard and unpleasant. Feeling around with my fingers, I realized it was something porous and hard. A bone. It was a bone. I jumped up and shone the flashlight around, discovering that the basement floor was strewn with bones and human skulls. I was dumbfounded with fear. Where had I ended up? Who pushed me? How could I get out? While my thoughts were sluggishly processing the impact, something moved in the corner. Something was sitting there and eating, judging by the chewing sounds. Suddenly the sound stopped, and it began to rise, probably about 2.5 meters tall. Thin, long legs, hands reaching below its knees, and crescent-shaped fingers or claws. It was hard to tell. The head. The head was remarkably toothy. It looked like a stretched, gnawed skull. No eyes, or maybe I just didn't see them. This ghoul lunged at me with a blood-curdling scream. Dropping my phone, I barely managed to dodge it and fell. Get up, I muttered to myself. Turning quickly, the creature lunged at me again. This time I didn't manage to block, and a razor-sharp claw slashed across my chest. Pain shot through my entire body, and apparently not just mine. The monster roared and fell next to me. My Swiss knife was sticking out of its chest. Run, I had to run. I didn't have a second knife. I jumped up and scrambled up the ladder, grabbing my phone from the floor. I heard the ghoul get up and run after me. With all the strength I had left, I climbed the steep steps, not caring about the ground and decaying flesh under my hands and feet. Suddenly, something grabbed my leg and pulled me down. Luckily, my boots were zipped, not laced. Quickly unzipping it in one motion, I left the boot behind and it fell. I opened the hatch, and it was already dawn outside. Quickly grabbing my bag, I slammed into the locked front door, hoping to break it open. Either I didn't weigh enough or lacked strength, but the door met me with a thud, and I bounced back. A latch. There was a latch on the door. Blind fool. Quickly getting up, I ran to the door, removed the latch, and heard the foul breathing behind me. Without looking back, I opened the door, rushed out, and ran to the car. The rain had stopped, and mist was spreading over the ground. Getting into the car, I instantly released the handbrake and drove off. Glancing in the rearview mirror, I saw only an old cemetery with no houses in sight. And on the street, 5 of those terrifying creatures stood, watching me leave. I did make it to the country house. My friends were almost speechless when they saw me in the morning. Dirty, with a bloody gash across my chest, without a boot, disheveled. I told them everything. A friend, puzzled, looked at me and said, "There is no village there. There's only an ancient cemetery, and it appeared after." Wait, there was a village there, but it burned down over 100 years ago. Everyone who lived there perished. They buried all the residents on the site of the burnt village. Yeah, I guess we'll take a different road home.